Hello, my name is Emily Crow from The Cozy Crow, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today is another reading wrap-up of the month of June, and as you can see, I have a lot of books to talk about today, and a couple of them aren't even in this stack. So let's hop right into it. So if we look at the month of June, I had a really big goal to clear some books off of my physical TBR. I have a couple shelves in my closet that I use for books I haven't read yet. And I really wanted to make more space because it felt like it was just overflowing and I needed to deal with it. So I made a goal in June to specifically try and read as many books as possible from my physical TBR, get them off of those TBR shelves and onto my bookshelf down here, which is also overflowing, but we have a plan to build a new bookshelf. It'll come eventually when we get around to that project. And I feel really successful. So I read in total 16 books in the month of June, and 14 of them I had a physical copy of. So even if I didn't read them physically, I still was able to take those books off my shelf, and I'm really happy about that. That is a huge chunk. Look at that. Volume-wise, that is a lot of books. I'm really proud of that. So 14 books off of my shelf out of 16 books that I read in the month. And one of the books that I did not get off of my shelf is actually an ARC, my very first ARC that I was gifted from the author themselves. I'm really excited that I had that privilege, and so I'll be talking about that later too. Some other statistics: I tend to read a lot of audiobooks with my commuting and drives, and when I'm exercising, like on a run or a walk or something, or if I'm doing chores around the house, things like that. So in the month of June, I had 10 audiobooks that I finished. I read one ebook, which was, again, the ARC that I read, and then I actually finished 5 physical books, which is more than I usually finish. So that is also really cool that there were enough books that were inspiring me to read really fast that I was able to get through them. When we look at genres, I had 6 fantasy novels, 4 romance, 2 mysteries, 1 nonfiction, 2 that were more literary fiction, and then 1 historical fiction. Now, as far as like subsets of that, for the 6 fantasy, 4 of them were considered romantasy books, which I feel like is not my favorite genre, but we'll get into that. And then as far as the 2 literary novels, one of them was kind of hard to place. I read If We Were Villains, which is kind of like a mystery thriller, but like not entirely. I feel like the focus and the writing style was more literary, so I put this in the literary category instead of in the mystery category, just because I felt like its strong suits were more literary than mystery. I thought it would be really interesting to look at when the books were published that I read, and I read 7 books that were published this year in 2024. I read 3 books that were published last year, and then I had 6 books that were published in any years prior. So I definitely tend to read more current books, but I think that's a lot of just what the algorithm feeds me, of what I see, what I'm excited about, what I hear people talking about. I read a mix for sure, but definitely more current books. So that's a quick look at the statistics of books that I read in the month of June. Let's start from the very beginning of what I read in June, and it was a rough start, like a really rough start. Like a couple of my least favorite books of the entire year probably were at the very beginning of June. I did not have good mojo. The first book that I read was 5 Broken Blades, which was the other book besides the ARC that I read that was not physically on my TBR. So I'll pop a picture up for you. 5 Broken Blades by Corland. And this is a romantasy novel set in like a pseudo Korean type of historical fantasy realm. I think the author might be Korean, and they included a lot of Korean elements in the world building and things like that. Basically, there are 5 assassins and 1 person that was tagging on that were recruited for a mission to kill the God King. It required some like assassination skills, but also some more like magic related skills, and so someone came up with this plan of how to like coordinate everybody together to do this heist. I really did not like this book. I rated it a 2.25 star. Where to start? So it felt like there was just no voice, no personality to any of these characters for the most part. I did the audiobook, and it was really hard to know who was talking and like whose chapter I was in, because it all sounded the same, and it took a really long time to figure out who all the characters were. Not because there was so many it was hard to keep track of, but because they all sounded exactly alike, and that was really hard to follow. There was a couple distinct moments or a couple distinct characters, but for the most part, it all was very bland and meshed together. In my brain, in the audiobook, it was all the same. I picked up this book in Costco and I read the first couple pages just to see if I would like it, and I didn't really like the voice then, so I didn't buy the book, and I should have just listened to myself and not even tried reading it, because I really didn't enjoy reading this book. But I was committed and I finished. I should have DNF'd it, but I finished. It felt like throughout this whole book, not really anything happened plot-wise. I could sum up the book in just a couple sentences, and it felt like there was no world building either. Like, I didn't really know what was happening in the world. There was a couple interesting elements that were like thrown in there that made me want to keep reading and figure out what this world was about, because it was intriguing, but I really just got snippets, especially in this, like, there were creatures that they encountered and things, and it just didn't give me a lot about it, and that was really frustrating for me as a reader. It felt very predictable and not very exciting to read. And then the romances, this is why I feel like romantasy is not my genre. The romances were very insta-lovey. I didn't really see a purpose in the romances. Everyone just kind of coupled off, and they didn't really know each other, but for some reason they were drawn to each other, and it was just very frustrating to read, because I felt like there was no point. I know some people have really liked this. I really did not. I do not see myself reading the next book. I see myself Google searching a synopsis to find out what happens next, to get some closure, and that's about it. And the worst of all, this whole heist that was planned and prepared, it had no contingency plans. We didn't really get a lot of details, which was fine earlier on when you thought you'd see more happening for the actual heist, and really not a lot even happened for the actual heist. There was bad planning. There really wasn't a lot of elements to the heist. It was very unsatisfying to read about when it actually happened. Some people have said this is like an adult Six of Crows. Not at all. There's like no details, no contingency plans. They didn't really even work together very well. It's unfortunate that there's so many of these new TikTok fantasy novels that are coming out that have beautiful sprayed edges and really look gorgeous. They look stunning. So it makes you want to buy them. And then you buy them and you realize that they are not that great. I have a lot of feelings about that. I will move on. The next book I read was kind of in a similar boat. No sprayed edges, but this is one I actually purchased, Lore of the Wilds by Analeigh Sbrana. This is also a romantasy book that involves Lore, who is human, and these two fae that she interacts with. There's a supposed love triangle. I didn't like it. But the fae in this world are very much like evil overlords to the humans. The humans stand out from everyone else who is magical and mythical, and there's just like this little group of humans that are being oppressed. Lore is taken by these fairies and brought to a castle where there is a library that the fairies can't get into, but has some old fairy text in it. And so because she can read their language, they enlist her to work through this library, organize, clean it out, find some things. The library is the main character in this book, but you only see it for the first like 30% of the book, which is really unfortunate because it was very atmospheric, it was very intriguing, there was a lot of mystery surrounding the library, and I just wanted more about the library. And then Laura runs away, she befriends a fairy, and then they go to more fairy friends and she's interacting with them, and I rated this a 2.5 star. It felt like a YA book, but had a couple random adult things thrown in, like 0 swearing for the whole book, and then it dropped like 2 random F-bombs. It felt very incongruent. There was one random spicy scene that felt contrived and awkward, and like they were just adding adult elements, which was very unsatisfying. I really didn't enjoy it. And even as a YA book, it felt very contrived. There were tons of plot devices that were thrown in to move the plot along, but there was 0 foreshadowing or like knowing where the story was going. It was very boring because I didn't know what was happening next. it felt like there was a lot of time spent on musings and conversations that had no bearing on the plot, but then big, huge moments like breaking into a castle and breaking out a prisoner took like only like a 10-page chapter in the whole book. The pacing was really weird with like the climaxes not given enough weight, and then the moments that were very low-key given a lot of attention. I just really did not like the balance of this book. And then this love triangle. One of the characters was really grumpy and mean, and you didn't like him at all. And the other one, it just felt very insta-lovey, like you really didn't see what he saw in lore. I will maybe listen to the next book, maybe. I'm slightly more likely to actually consume the next book. I don't know. It's just so pretty. I don't know if they can redeem themselves. We'll see. The next few books I read, I rated much higher, and I'm not sure if this is because in comparison they were way better than the first couple books I read in the month, or if they were really that good, but we'll hype them up anyway. The next book I want to talk about is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I've not read any Abby Jimenez books before this month, and I thoroughly enjoy her as an author. If you like Emily Henry, who writes contemporary romances that also have a lot of weight to them, they're not overly like traumatized or dramatic or sad like a couple authors I've read, but they do have a lot more deeper meanings in them. There's definitely still a happy ending, but you see how these characters are dynamic and likable but also flawed, and it's just really good space for romance. I don't really enjoy the more shallow romances, so I really like Abby Jimenez's depth of her characters, of the story, of the conflicts. I'm a huge fan, so definitely will keep reading more of hers. This book specifically addresses a lot of topics on domestic abuse, if that's a trigger for you, and there are multiple forms of domestic abuse that are shown to light in this book, both between the main girl character and her previous partner, as well as some other side characters within the story. So that's something to be aware of. I think that Abby Jimenez did a really good job at addressing those topics in a sensitive way and showing that there's a lot of variety in domestic abuse, and it's not just one size fits all for what you will see. And I really appreciated her representation of that. Alexis and Daniel. So Alexis is a doctor, and she is carrying on the family legacy of being a doctor at this one random hospital, and so she feels very tied down. She wants to move on because her ex is there, and she just like wants to be doing something different. She feels very pigeonholed. She is on a road trip, and she breaks down and runs into this guy, Daniel, who helps her out a little bit. They end up connecting. They have a one-night stand that she wasn't intending. They just got really close in their like extended date that they had. He's from a small town that's a couple hours away from where she's living with her, doctor's salary and this really nice house, and he's living in this small town, and there's just some big barriers between their relationship, both with distance and place in life, and also the kinds of friends that they have and family also, like who will be accepting of their partnership. So it had a lot of layers, and it was definitely a higher stakes, like third act conflict to see how their relationship would navigate those challenges, which I really liked. I do feel like Alexis needs more therapy, and it mentions it in the book that she goes to a therapist, and then it also mentions partway through that she stopped going to her therapist because she was making more time to go visit Daniel, and I was like, no, go to therapy, please. She definitely needs more therapy, but by the end of the book, it's a really happy ending, and I really was satisfied with how things worked out for them. 5-star for sure. The next book I read was also 5-star, and this is Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. This is a twisted fantasy type of a novella. Yes, nice and short, maybe like 120 pages. It was really short. I almost finished it on one random night shift that I had. I had like 15 pages left. It was frustrating. I was trying hard to finish and things came up, but I really like T. Kingfisher. I feel like they do a really good job at crafting these novellas that have some subtleties and interesting characters, and also a really good beginning, middle, end, like just the way that they pace their story. I feel like Kingfisher is really good at this. This is a fantasy inspired by Sleeping Beauty, where Kingfisher was thinking, what if Sleeping Beauty was put under a spell for a reason? What if she was the bad guy? And so you hear about this little fairy, this toadling, and a knight, and how they interact, and you learn the backstory of how this came to be and what happens as the knight tries to wake up the Sleeping Beauty type of character. So I really enjoyed it. I want more of what this is, but it also was nice and complete in the story it had. Definitely recommend. And like I said, I really wanted to read more Jimenez, and this book came up in my Libby loans for audiobooks, and so I really tried to read Part of Your World first so I could get to Yours Truly by Jimenez. Is anyone else bothered that these covers don't really coordinate? I mean, I understand what this one's about, I understand what this one's about, but I'm like, I don't like how this one is like two halves. Okay. Yours Truly is in the same world as Part of Your World. It involves a different ER doctor, Bree, I think is her name. Yes, Bree. So Bree, you see her in the first book in this interconnected standalone series, and you really like her character. She's really spunky. She's got a lot of energy and a lot of heart. She is going through a divorce. She's trying to handle her brother needing a kidney donor. There's just like a lot of stress in her life. She's really hoping to get promoted. She wants to become the head ER doctor. She feels like that's the next step in her career, but then a new doctor just hired for this ER, who was head of the department in his last hospital, is also up for the promotion, and so she is really annoyed. She just wants something to work out for her in her life. She and this doctor butt heads at the beginning, and you then see how their relationship progresses and changes as they come to understand each other a little bit better after this not so meet cute, and they become friends. There's some fake dating, and they end up really getting close. I really loved how in the first half of this book, Bree is very understanding of like Jacob's language, of the way that he interacts with the world. He has some severe social anxiety even amongst his family members, and she is a really amazing support for him in that. However, I feel like that part of her personality and her like strength that she was adding to the relationship peters off in the second half of the book, and she just totally disregards how he does things a little different because of the way he sees the world, and he needs a lot of support in that. And so she makes some assumptions, and she disregards certain things that he does and sees the world in one way, which I feel like didn't really fit how she interacted with him in the first half of the book. So that was a little frustrating to read. So not a perfect story. I rated this a 4.5. I still really enjoyed it, but it was frustrating. Also, my Libby loan, like as I was listening, skipped forward like 60 pages randomly, and I didn't know. And I got some huge whiplash from jumping around in the story and the book dropping like this huge bomb of something happening. If you read this book, you probably know what I'm talking about, but because it skipped forward like 50 or 60 pages, I was like, wait, they were like not even dating, and now there's this like, anyway, it was crazy, and I was very angry at this book because of what it put me through, but it was really Libby's fault for jumping forward, and I had to go back and re-listen to those 50 or 60 pages to understand the context, but I was still really worked up about it, so maybe that influenced my rating. But overall, it had the same like tender and dynamic characters that you really love but also recognize their flaws. I just was bothered by Bree in the second half and how I feel like her characterization kind of changed, and I'm not sure why that was when she should have been feeling safer and more settled in the second half of the book than in the first half. But I still really enjoyed this book, and I really have enjoyed Jimenez's work, and I'm hoping to read the next book in this interconnected standalone series soon that had just come out earlier this year. The next book I read was also 4.5 star. I had a lot of really good reads this month, which is great considering how the month started. But this is The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton. This was long anticipated for me. I've loved Stuart Turton's other couple of books. They are all very different mystery type of novels, but they all have similar elements of very complex, intricate stories that you might see little hints of clues earlier in the story if you reread the book, but it's really hard to piece together throughout the book kind of what's happening. This book is a little bit different, like I said, than his other novels. It's more dystopian and sci-fi, and this is at a point where there's only like 120 people left on this little island. They think they are the end of the world. There's nothing surrounding the island except this fog that has covered the whole earth, and they are the last ones left. And you come to find out through this story more and more how dystopian and sci-fi this book really is, which is really interesting to learn more about it. I definitely have a lot more questions, and it's very intriguing thinking about this kind of scenario, and I would love to hear more in this type of world, which is partly why I bought the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition, which is pink sprayed edges, which is so fun. But there's also a short story at the end that is about humans that are trying to travel to this island as the fog is encroaching and like the world is ending. They're trying to get to this safe haven, this scientific island where they are like holding the fog at bay. Super cool. This story is definitely complex and intricate, but not nearly as much as his other novels, so that's why I didn't like this as much as his others, though it was still a very interesting concept, and you were learning a lot. There is this pseudo narrator in the book that is in everyone's like shared conscience named Abby, and what's cool is that everyone's mind has been wiped after this murder accident happens. They're trying to figure out the clues while no one remembers anything. So they're trying to piece things together. So that was really interesting to kind of see how things came together. I was not surprised by some of the ending, but also some of the ending definitely was a good surprise, and I really enjoyed it. Time for my favorite book of June, and Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I am blown away. YA fantasy? This is not YA fantasy. This is written so beautifully. There's so much emotion in this story. The high stakes are everywhere. Like, I was so emotionally invested in these characters, in the story, and what was happening. There's a lot of nuance in these characters, a lot of morally gray, kind of figuring out what's wrong, what's right. It was beautiful and did not feel like just a YA fantasy. I would have rated this a 5-star even if it was in the adult section. Like, it is amazing. It is the first of 4 in this series, and I'm so excited to read the next books. I was just waiting for my library hold, and I just got one in for the second book in the series, and I am really excited to dive right in. They just recently updated the covers, and I had gotten this book secondhand from a bookstore near me, and when I realized they had updated the covers, I thought I should probably get the rest of the books in this cover so that they match, because that would really bother me if my books didn't match in the same style, because the new covers don't have like these people and colors. There's like one color and then it just has the words. They look very different. I needed my books to match. I was thinking I would love this. And as soon as I started listening to this audiobook, I was like, yep, I need to read the rest of the story. I need these books. And so I went to like 4 different bookstores to try to get the rest of the series, and I was successful. I did it. I'm so happy. I was really nervous because it was honestly really hard. I got like 1 book from 3 different bookstores, and then I had 1 bookstore I couldn't even find a book at, which was a little startling. I was really nervous, but I managed to get all 4 books with this cover style, and I'm really excited. In this fantasy world, Laya's family has just been killed by the regime, by the militaristic regime, and there's some like magic involved in this world too that you see glimpses of. And so she tries to find the rebels to get help so that she can rescue her brother, who was imprisoned when the rest of her family was killed, because her parents used to be rebels. And they don't really trust her. They give her kind of an impossible mission to infiltrate the like battle school that is training the masks, or like the highest level of assassin from this regime. And so she's sent to be a servant for the commandant, or like the leader of this battle school. Lots of torture, there's lots of abuse. You follow Laya, but then you also follow the commandant's bastard son, who the commandant is not happy about. Like, she kind of wants to get rid of him. And the commandant's son, what's his name? Elias? He is very conflicted about the role he's playing being a student at this battle school and graduating soon, and he kind of wants to run away. Then there's this trial to pick the next emperor, and there are 4 students that were graduating that are selected for this task, and Elias is one of them. So you follow both of their perspectives and also how their lives come together at the end of this book. I'm very excited to read this next book. It is heart-wrenching and heartfelt. I love it. The next book I finished in June, this is one I've been working on for a long time. This is What You Must Know About Hashimoto's Disease by Brittany, Henderson, MD, and Allison, Futterman. This is a nonfiction book. I don't read a ton of nonfiction. This was my book that I brought to work, so when it's day shift and like the doctors are around and there's family members, I could have a medical book to read when I was extremely bored on those rare occasions when I have nothing to do for my patients. So I thought this would be a good book to have in my bag just to read while I'm at work. So that's why it took me so long, like months and months and months. This is a really good introductory book to Hashimoto's. I have Hashimoto's and I wanted to just learn more about other ways besides medication that I could improve my wellness. I rated this a 3.5 star. It was all right. It had a lot of factual evidence. It had input from both a patient and a doctor, and I liked how it talked about a variety of things, both like Eastern medicine and Western medicine, both like pharmacological, medical related, as well as non-pharmacological ways to address Hashimoto's disease. I just felt like it was all right. It was a fine book. It was a good start, but I definitely want to dive more into these topics. I want to learn more for myself so I can make informed decisions about the kind of things I want to do, maybe if I want to change my diet or things like that to improve my wellness. What really bothered me, there's a big bibliography at the end of this book, which is awesome, but there were 0 footnotes throughout this entire book, so you don't know which bibliography points to what parts of this book. And I feel like that's a huge disservice to the reader, and even if they have a big bibliography, if you don't have things cited, how do I know that the supposed facts in this book are connected to the bibliography instead of being like an extrapolation? That makes sense? So, like, not the best. I have a medical background. I'm an ICU nurse. And so while I feel like a lot of this book was very easy to understand for a non-medical background, I just feel like for what I'm looking for in a book about Hashimoto's, this didn't quite deliver and was not as scientifically backed as I would hope. The next book that I read was a physical book actually, and it's a novella. This is Powerful by Lauren Roberts. This is 1.5 in the Powerless trilogy. The next book comes out literally tomorrow, and I'm working tomorrow, but I really wanted the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition, so I ordered it, pre-ordered. We'll see when it arrives and I can start it. But this is the story of Adina. While it follows some moments that are within the first book, it's pretty separate because Adina is only shown a little bit in the first book. I had a harder time getting into these characters and this romance than in Powerless. I just was not nearly as invested. It took a while to kind of get comfortable with these characters and the grumpy sunshine dynamic. I wasn't feeling these characters as much. I did by the end, but it just took a lot longer, especially for a novella, for me to like really get into it. It doesn't look like a novella, but like the type is really big and it's only what, like 220 pages, 230 pages, not very long at all, especially compared to Powerless, which is very thick and hefty and also has very small type. I wanted less romance and more plot in this book because there were definitely moments like Adina talking to the king right before the last trial that I would have loved to be a fly on the wall for, and we just didn't get that. I rated this a 4-star. I still enjoyed it. I really like Lauren Roberts' writing. I feel like she has a really beautiful and yet easy to read style, which is great for YA. This is definitely a YA book. Mac, oh my goodness. I want this to be Mac's rebel origin story. He was broken at the end. And I was a little bit broken too. I knew it was coming, but it still broke me. Speaking of hefty books, because Powerless is hefty, Powerful was not. But this one, When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, is a hefty book. It's got a good flop though. I did the audiobook for this because there was no way I was going to finish this 20-hour listen by myself. but I referred back to this book a lot, especially at the beginning as I was trying to get my bearings. This is a fantasy that has a glossary, if that tells you anything. I have not read one of those in a very, very long time. I really, really enjoyed the plot. I enjoyed this world. I enjoyed the magic, and I enjoyed learning more and more about what was going on. This is supposed to be, I think, a trilogy, and so I'm really intrigued by what was given in this book, and I really want to learn more. I rated this a 4.5 star. I was just very immersed in this world, and I really enjoyed it. This is a romantasy, and it was mostly plot, but there were a couple scenes that were romance heavy and spicy, and I honestly didn't like the spicy scenes as much because I felt like I just wanted to get back to the plot and the story and what was happening. I liked how I didn't really know what was happening next, but the story kept moving along, though for how long this book is, almost 700 pages, not as much happened as you would think over 700 pages, but it was just an intro to the series, and so I didn't necessarily feel like it needed to have so much action-packed as far as plot. I still feel like there was a lot that happened in this book, but for the length, it didn't feel as much happened, if that makes sense. I also feel like the glossary was super helpful, but the farther along I got in the book, the less the glossary was applicable, and so they would like name a creature and it wasn't in the glossary, or they would introduce a person and it wasn't in the glossary, and so that was kind of frustrating that I really liked the glossary, but it wasn't as fleshed out as I had come to expect from the very beginning of the book, if that makes sense. But beautiful cover, beautiful book. I really like the writing style. I do really like the romance. I want to see where it's going, but I just didn't really care for the spicy scenes, and there wasn't anything wrong with them. I just was liking the plot and the fantasy part of this book so much, I didn't want to read the spicy scenes. I just wanted to move on, if that makes sense. Because a book that's typically written in this kind of high fantasy style doesn't go into extreme detail on like explicit spicy scenes. They are usually more vague and quick and kind of fade to black type of thing. So different style. If you like romantasy and can handle a heavy plot, I think you would enjoy this book. There are dragons, there's betrayal, there's some memory loss, they are all elves. I really enjoyed it. The next book I read, audiobook, I actually finished this in a single day. Granted, I was doing a lot of chores around the house, kind of getting the house clean for us to go on a trip. I was packing, I was doing like 4 loads of laundry. It was a very busy day, but all things that I could take care of while I was listening to this book, and I finished it pretty quick. This is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is my first book by R.F. Kuang that I've actually read. I have a few on my TBR, and I'm really happy with this book. I rated this a 4.5 star. This is about a white author who is feeling dissatisfied with how her career is going. She has basically one friend, and they're not even that friendly, but this other friend is Asian and has found great success. And the white friend, I wish I remembered their names, so sorry. June is the white one, and Athena is the Asian friend who June is jealous of. June watches Athena die. It's very traumatic. Though she's not as traumatized as some people think she might be, because they weren't as close, and she was very jealous of Athena. So it was just kind of like a weird dynamic, which was very interesting. Like, it was weird, but not in a bad way for a reader. It was just very fascinating to read. June steals Athena's last manuscript that she was very secretive about. She makes some edits to it, makes it her own, and she ends up getting published and becoming a huge hit. So she finally has her lucky break, but a lot of what she wrote about is coming from Athena. And so there's a lot of like inner turmoil as she's trying to justify what she's doing. The story continues as she's still trying to get more ideas for her next story and her next story, but still kind of relying on Athena. And so there's definitely like a descent into madness. There's definitely like a lot of justification happening. I really liked the subtle yet clear representation of like racism in common culture and also appropriation in common culture. And as a white person, I am biased for sure, but I could see a lot of what was happening and felt very cringy, but also realistic in like the racism that was taking place, the covert racism. Very interesting read. I really liked it. I definitely recommend. Though Like I said, you could see her descent into madness as she thought that Athena was coming back to life, was haunting her, things like that. And I just wanted more madness. Like, I expected this to kind of turn horror-esque at the end, and it didn't quite go as far as I wanted it to, but I still really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was the only ebook I read, which was The Arc That I Was Gifted, A Love Beyond the Stars by Jennifer Chipman. And this is an indie author that I think I just saw a sponsored story on my Instagram, and that's why I found it. But this is a space travel, sci-fi type of contemporary romance, which was really fun. I really like the idea of more books in that realm. I do really like sci-fi. So I was really excited to be selected to read this book. I rated it a 3-star. It was all right, but kind of disappointing, honestly. I think it's just, I had so many notes about why this book was just not quite hitting for me. It started off really strong and then just got worse and worse throughout the book. The dedication to this book, it was like for all the girlies who watched Chris Pine in Star Trek and said, we're gonna get me one of those. And I feel like that really sums up this type of book. It was a more shallow style romance instead of having a lot of depth to the characters, to the situations, to the conflicts. It also was very unoriginal in the sci-fi elements. Like, they called things communicators for like talking to one another and their little like handheld things. It just felt very unoriginal, not very interesting to read the sci-fi elements of it. I wanted way more sci-fi and way more interesting things. And maybe it's because I read Becky Chambers, which is not super hard sci-fi, but it's like definitely sci-fi. It's just more cozy, but there's lots of really good details and lots of like ethical topics and deeper ideas that are mentioned throughout. And after reading Becky Chambers and then comparing it to the sci-fi in this book, like, they didn't talk about ethical dilemmas of like going to a random moon and like having a critter hop on their bag and taking it back to the ship and like interacting with the native life on this moon and like the implications of that. And there was just like some really dangerous choices that the characters made that didn't make any sense considering their training to go out in space for like a 5-year mission. And it was just, I was bothered a lot by things like that that just didn't make sense to what I expect from a sci-fi novel. So if you really don't have a lot of sci-fi exposure and your really only exposure is Chris Pine and Star Trek, I think you would like this book from a sci-fi standpoint. Also, the characters just made lots of really stupid decisions, like I mentioned. I felt like the depth of the like relationship was very shallow, honestly. I didn't get a lot of like fun banter or a lot of like soul-searching conversations where they came to understand each other. There was a lot of, it just felt kind of insta-lovey. And oh my goodness, the spicy scenes. There were a ton of spicy scenes in this book. So if you like that kind of thing, that's there for you. It'll fit. They literally said that. They literally said that. Not only were there so many spicy scenes, but they were kind of cringe. Actually, pretty cringe. There were a lot of things I had issues with in the spicy scenes. Like, it'll fit. I also felt like the space drama of like, you know, having to leave the ship to do repairs and like an asteroid field coming and like all these things were very anticlimactic and resolved really quickly without lasting repercussions, and that was very unsatisfying to read. Yeah, I just wanted more sci-fi. I wanted a deeper romance. Maybe I'll push this rating down, but I think a lot of it is just my personal preference on like what I was looking for, and this was not what I was looking for in a romance, but it might be what you're looking for. I really hope there are more books out there that fit this sci-fi contemporary romance realm, because I feel like that would be super, super fun. But this book was not what I wanted. And I don't know. I don't know if I'll read another book from this author. Maybe if I ever get Kindle Unlimited, then I would read one of her other books and see if I change my mind about her, or she just might not be the kind of author for me and what I want from a romance. The next book that I read was The Corpse in the Closet by Lucy Score. This is the second book in the Riley Thorne series. There are 3 books out currently. I love them, love them, love them. Please read these books so that she comes out with more, because I really want to see more of Riley and Nick. This book takes place immediately after the first book in the series, where Riley is, I guess, proposition sounds bad, but where the police department reaches out to Riley and wants her psychic help to help solve a mystery. Nick is not happy about it because he doesn't want her in danger, and Riley stumbles upon multiple missing persons and multiple deaths that are all kind of connected and trying to figure out what happened. This book is more ridiculous than the last book, so that's why I rated it at 4.25 star. I'm just not as much into the ridiculousness and the unrealisticness, but this book is still really hilarious. I really liked the multiple subplots from the first book and how they are threaded throughout the second book, and so you see them all progress and different characters having things happen to them and seeing things kind of threaded together. I had a lot of fun and really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the next book in the series, which is the last one that's been published, and just having another really nice comfort read of this like rom-com plus paranormal mystery, just like a laugh out loud funny book. I've really enjoyed the series, so when I really need a comfort read like that, then I'll read the next one in this series. This next book that I read was not one I was planning on purchasing, but I needed to fill my Amazon order to get free shipping, and I had decided that I am eventually going to buy these books, so I figured I would just do it. This is The Comfort of Ghosts by Jacqueline Winspear. This is the very last Maisie Dobbs novel. It's a historical mystery series, and this is book 18. I have read every other book in this series, and so when this came out, I knew I wanted to listen to it because I really enjoyed the narration by Orla Cassidy. I'm kind of sad that it's ending, but in retrospect, after reading a lot of other books, I've realized I really love this series. Like a 4.5 to 5 star series for me for sure, even though some of the other books I've rated I've put lower down, but reading more mysteries, I really like the formulas that this author uses for her stories, and I really love how strong of a historical element there is as the series follows Maisie Dobbs becoming a private investigator post World War I and having flashbacks to World War I all the way up through post World War II. And this book is definitely a reflection on the rest of the series, and you hear and visit all the things that had happened in the past, I don't know, 15, 20 years of her life. Different marriages and losses and changing of her career and things like that. This book had a couple smaller mysteries in it and spent a lot more time reflecting than in previous books, so it didn't quite follow the same formula of her other books in the series, but it was definitely a good conclusion to the series. I rated it a 4.5 star. I really love Maisie Dobbs, and I decided that I do want these books on my bookshelf to recommend and to reread, and so I've started collecting the books. When I see them at like a secondhand bookstore, I'm starting to collect the paperbacks. The past couple books that I've found, like I think 16 and 17, are hardback, and so I decided to just buy the hardback version of the last book so that at least those few would match. And the rest I'll probably do paperback for them. We're getting close to the end. Okay, this next book that I read, I really squeezed it in because of Poppy Books book club that they had going on. I've been meaning to read this, and this was actually part of my physical TBR for the year 2024, so it was nice to knock this off the list too. This is If We Were Villains by ML Rio. This was published in 2017. I didn't realize it was quite that old. Okay, I love this cover, but I do really like the other cover too that has like the skull and there's like a knife in it too. Like, it's a pretty cool design. This is a mystery slash thriller, definitely more literary, like I was saying earlier, of a bunch of college age students earning a certificate from a conservatory. At first I thought it was a liberal arts college, but it's definitely a conservatory, so they're trying to earn their certificates and have this on their resume. There's a group of 6 students, I think 7, that are part of the theater program, and they are doing a lot of Shakespeare. They're thespians through and through, and these students are all really close to one another, and they're finishing out their senior year, but there's some conflict that arises, some drama as relationships start to fracture, and someone eventually dies. So this book is told in 2 timelines, one of Oliver, who is coming out of prison, who is telling a detective who just wants some closure, like what the real story was, and then also jumping back in time to 97, I think is when the original mystery occurs, to 97, where these friends are all like moving towards this death and then afterwards and the repercussions of that death until Oliver gets arrested. And you learn about what truly happened. I really enjoyed this book. I rated it a 4.25 star. I feel like if I had more background in Shakespeare, I would get a lot more out of this book, especially because it's written with a lot of scenes and even some scripting. There's also a lot of parallels between Shakespeare's tragedies and this book as far as the characterization of these people and like when the murder happens in like act 2 of this book kind of parallels Julius Caesar. And it was just really fascinating. The more I talked to other people at this book club, the more was infused into this book as far as Shakespearean literature goes. And I think that the more I read Shakespeare, the more I would get out of this book. And I definitely want to do that. I want to learn more Shakespeare. I want to read this book again and take it slower and really dive in and see all those connections that the author has made. It's really well done in a literary sense. As far as the mystery goes, it was kind of predictable. A lot of people in the book club said they were surprised, but I knew pretty early on who was gonna die, who was gonna be the murderer, and I also suspected a plot twist pretty close to the end of like someone else passing away. But it was really fascinating to see how everything kind of evolved and came to be through this book. It was really good fall vibes if you're looking for like a fall mystery, because it takes place in the autumn time. There was definitely like this descent into madness. I keep saying that. I love descents into madness, where these characters after the death and like the repercussions of that death on their theater and on their relationships and on themselves personally, and just seeing them kind of devolve. It was very fascinating and I really enjoyed that. The ending, some people really like it. It's an ambiguous ending. I did not like it as much. I feel like the ambiguousness of the ending doesn't fit the characters that are involved. Like if the ending was written slightly differently and was not as ambiguous, it would fit the characters a little better from what like I understood from the characters. And that's just like me personally. Some people really loved the ambiguous ending. I don't know. It was just very interesting thinking about these characters. Very great book club book. Very great book to reread and go back to and see more from. I really enjoyed it. And then the last book I finished in June was Carrie, Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I did this on audiobook as well, and I really love Taylor Jenkins Reid's audiobooks. I've read Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I've also read Daisy Jones and the Six, and I've enjoyed both of those immensely, especially from an audio standpoint. This was also dynamic in its audio with like newscasters and things like that thrown in. That was really fun, so I definitely recommend the audiobook for this. I did not like this book as much as her other books that I've read, but I still really enjoyed it. I rated it a 4.25 star. I really loved the sports aspect of it. I learned a lot about tennis, and I felt like the little introductions you got at the beginning of how the sport works really helped you understand the play-by-plays going on later in the book. You get a dual timeline kind of Carrie growing up and excelling from the beginning in the tennis world, and also Carrie in the moment deciding, I want to come out of retirement for one last season to try to beat my record, secure myself as like the best tennis player. And so that was really interesting to read about and to kind of see how she became the person that she was. I really like the characterization, though. She's definitely an unlikable character, and that's kind of the point, which is okay. There were a couple moments though where her flaws were so egregious, like the way she was interacting with other people, that I was uncomfortable and I wanted to like set boundaries with her. Like it was just kind of hard to read. So while she was unlikable, there were really no redeeming qualities for her, which was a little hard to read about when you saw like her worst self come through. I liked the little bit of romance that was added into the story. It was pretty subtle, pretty gentle, which was nice. It didn't detract from the story. I really liked in the sports world, it was just very emotional. And if you are one who gets emotional when you see like really amazing sports, or you see someone win when they've been working so hard, like an underdog winning, if you feel that, you're gonna cry probably when you read this book. I felt very emotionally connected to like the wins and losses and what was happening. The story was a little bit predictable. I kind of knew what was happening, though there were a couple twists and turns, and there was one really big plot twist towards the end that kind of propelled Carrie into her character growth. And I don't necessarily agree with how the author did that. I just feel like the character growth that took place didn't really fit with the majority of the book, Carrie, and it also didn't quite fit with the incident that had propelled her growth in the first place. So it didn't quite work for me, but I still really enjoyed this book as a whole. Definitely recommend it. If you are a tennis fan, I would love to hear if you've read this book and if you like it. I'm not a tennis fan, but it makes me want to watch tennis now. 16 books read in June. I honestly had a pretty great reading month, though I had a couple duds for sure. I was very distressed at the beginning of the month. I was worried I would not get a lot of good books, but I had a lot of really good books on my bookshelf that I'm really happy that I got through. I've been putting off a lot of my Libby loans for books I don't have on my bookshelf because I was trying to read books on my bookshelf this month. And so I think that my stack next month will look very different because I'll have a lot of books that I listen to and I don't own, but we'll see kind of what happens. Let me show you a couple books that I'm currently reading, as well as a couple books I'm hoping to read in the month of July. A couple books that I'm currently reading that I'm hoping to get to in the month of July. I am still reading The Sock Project. It is July 1st. I missed my deadline, but I'm really close to finishing, so I'll probably finish it today. So I'm not even going to talk about it here in this TBR section. It'll get finished really soon. And we'll get started on the next book for my book club. I put up a poll on my Discord. The poll will be closed by the time this video comes out, but if you want to join in on whatever book we read, I'll post the book right here so you can see, and I'll put the link to my Discord down below so that you can check it out and join our book club, as we are reading a fiber-related novel this time. The nonfiction books have kind of been a struggle for me to get through, and so I think doing a novel will be fun and easy. And I'm excited to get into something a little different. And I know Jenny Colgan has a knit-related novel coming out in August, so that might even be the next book that we read for my book club, depending. The books I'm currently reading, my audiobook is Can't Spell Treason Without Tea by Rebecca Thorne, and I had seen this book talked about a while ago, and I was wondering if it was maybe an arc, but I read that this book was actually indie published first, so probably someone read it indie published, and it just recently got traditionally published, which is really exciting. It's got really fun blue edges, and the art is really fun too. It involves these two characters, a mage and a private guard for the queen, who's kind of evil, and they're in a relationship, these two women, and they decide to step away from their old lives and start a new life in this cozy little mountain town near where the dragons are, and to open up a tea and bookshop, which is exciting. It's very cozy, though it's definitely a little bit more like higher stakes compared to Travis Baldry's work. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I'm about a quarter of the way through, just listening to it on audio, and it's been a quick read, an enjoyable one too. And then I'm still reading Empire Storms and Tower of Dawn. These are taking me a really long time. I am about 40% of the way through Empire Storms and about 55% of the way through Tower of Dawn. Technically, this book comes first and then this book, but I'm reading them in tandem, and I'm following some random tandem list that I found. And so I think I'll catch up on Empire Storms pretty soon. I have like maybe 1 or 2 more chapters of Tower of Dawn, and then I'm gonna read like 15 chapters of this in a row, just to follow more chronologically through both stories, especially because I'm not as much of a fan of Kale, though definitely growing on me in this book. I'm really enjoying myself. It's just a really long read to do both of these at once, but I guess it's preparing me for Kingdom of Ash, which is about 1,000 pages. And that will also be a long read, but it will involve less switching back and forth between books, which will be nice. And then I also have 2 books that I have barely started. That'll probably be physical books that I read soon. This is Network Effect by Martha Wells. This is the next book in the Murderbot series. It starts out with 4 novellas and then it has this full-length novel. I've read all the novellas physically and I've really enjoyed that. I started reading this audiobook and I just didn't connect with the narrator. I think because I've read all the other books physically, I had a different voice in my head than what the narrator is going for. So I didn't have a problem with the narrator, but it just didn't fit what I was getting out of these books. And so I felt like I would enjoy it more if I read it physically. So I read the first chapter on audio, barely started, but I will read this physically really soon, hopefully. I really love Murderbots and their antisocialness and also how human they feel. And then I'm also really in the mood to read Not Just Jane. This is a book I bought from my local used bookstore, Pioneer Books in Provo, Utah. And this is by Shelley DeWeese. And it says, rediscovering 7 amazing women writers who transformed British literature who are not Jane Austen, which is really interesting. I'm excited to read about this. It's not super long. I think that it'll be like a really fun niche nonfiction to read, and I'll have to let you know what I think as I read this, because I really don't know any of these others. I mean, I recognize Mary Elizabeth Braddon's name. I recognize Mary Robinson. Other than that, oh, I guess Sarah Coleridge, I think I recognize that name. That sounds vaguely familiar, but all the rest I haven't even heard of, and I couldn't even tell you a specific work that any of these authors have written. And so I think it'll be very educational, and I'm excited to read about it. And I already mentioned that I have a list of 24 physical books I want to read in 2024, and I'm finally caught up and even a little ahead of my goal this month in June. I've read 13 books of the 24. So Part of Your World was one of them. Thornhedge was another one that I really wanted to read. If We Were Villains, and then also Carrie Soto is back. So those 4 are the books that I read for my physical TBR, my special physical TBR in the month of June. And that caught me right up and even excelled my goal of 2 a month. So the books that I'm hoping to read in July that are part of that 24 in 2024 includes Mixed Signals by B.K. Borison. This is the summer book in this series from Love Light Farms. This involves Layla, who is the baker. She's so sweet. And Caleb, I think he worked for the police department, maybe? Anyway, you could see that they had a thing going, that they, there was some connection earlier on in the series. I'm really excited to see how this book goes. And the covers are so, so cute. The 4th book is coming out really soon. The fall book, each of them takes place in a different season. And so I'm really excited to read this book. I liked Love Light Farms, solid holiday romance. I liked In the Weeds, all right, though I definitely had some issues with that book. I'm hoping I like Mixed Signals the most. And then I'm not sure how I feel about, I think Business Casual is what the 4th one will be called. The premise doesn't sound like something I would enjoy as much, but I do want to finish out this series because I have enjoyed the writing style. There are just some choices that the author makes that I don't prefer in my romances, but that's why we read a lot, so we can have a good variety and I know more about myself on what I enjoy. And I really enjoy these covers, so I'm still gonna buy them because they're beautiful. So we'll see how this story goes. I'm really excited to read a fun summer romance. And then because I really want to get into Shakespeare some more, I have this copy of Antony and Cleopatra, which is a tragedy, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly. I've seen the play once, but it was a long time ago, before I was married, but still in college. So maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I watched the play once, and I've chosen to purchase the Oxford Shakespeare of Antony and Cleopatra. And maybe the first half of this, first 40% is just information, an introduction. So probably a lot of historical things about Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. And then the rest is the play itself. Oh, wait, there's an appendix. Oh my gosh. Excerpts from the life of Marcus Antonius. I really don't know a lot about it, so I am ready to dive in and learn a lot, do some highlighting, make some notes, really dive in preparation for Chloe Gong's book that's inspired by Antony and Cleopatra. And I just want to learn more about Shakespeare and do more of that study, because I don't have a lot of exposure. And that was kind of unsatisfying to read Emma Rio's book. I really enjoyed it, but I knew if I knew more Shakespeare, I would get more out of it. There was a scene from Macbeth that they acted, and there were a scene from Romeo and Juliet that they acted, and they had Julius Caesar was their big play, and then they had another one. They were going to do King Lear. I have very minimal understanding of Shakespeare and knowledge of Shakespeare that I can pull out of my head. So I want to fix that for sure. And I'm hoping that this will be a good way to do that. Though I might want to get one of those No Fear Shakespeare books that kind of translates things into the modern speech, so that if there are phrasings that I don't understand, I can kind of get a little bit more accustomed to it. I'm not sure, but I'm going to start with this and do some good study from it, and we'll see how it goes. Because, yeah, I don't really remember very much, and I would love to learn more. Thank you so much for watching this video as I shared all the books that I read in June and as I shared a little bit about what I'm hoping to read in July. It was a really fun experiment to look at my physical TBR and try to pick some books from there to knock out and to read and to do a lot of audiobooks to try to get through some of those physical books. I definitely still have a lot more to do. I definitely want to do more readathons in the future, but July is going to be full of yarn related content. So if you are here for the yarn content, you've got a lot coming. And if you're here for the reading content, thank you for being here. These videos are not as popular, but I've had a lot of fun doing them, and I hope to do more content probably in August of doing maybe another romance readathon, trying to hit some summer romances before the fall season. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought about them, if you have any favorites from this list, or if you're wanting to read any of these books that I have read recently. And let me know down below. I'd love to chat with you down there in the comment section. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification to be notified every time I post a new video, whether it's yarn related or book related. And until next time, happy reading. Bye!